لمصلحة من ما يحدث في مصر. اتقوا الله في مصر، اتقوا الله في بلدكم. 3 شهداء، 20 مصاب، وكلهم من جنود الجيش. جراء إطلاق المتظاهرين الأقباط المحتشدين أمام مبنى اتحاد الإذاعة والتلفزيون النار عليهم، أكد شهود عيان أن فئات المتظاهرين الأقباط
I'm Commissioner Fred Davey of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, an independent bipartisan federal advisory body. USCIRF has closely monitored the discrimination and abuses long endured by the Copts, Egypt's indigenous Christian community. We recognize that the Coptic experience is one shaped by martyrdom, both in centuries past and sadly in the 21st century. Today, we join Coptic solidarity and Egyptians of all backgrounds in honoring some of those latter-day martyrs, the 27 Copts who died on October 9, 2011, when the Egyptian army disbanded a peaceful Coptic protest at Cairo's Maspero building. In commemorating the 10th anniversary of those courageous men and women, we at USCIRF reflect on the terrible circumstances of the Maspero Massacre and on the conditions in Egypt that have persisted in threatening Copts' freedom and safety within their own country. The protesters on that night 10 years ago had gathered in front of the Maspero radio and television building to draw attention to a long-standing source of Coptic anguish, the targeted destruction of churches by anti-Christian mobs and the Egyptian government's frequent failure to bring to justice the perpetrators of such crimes. The October 9th Maspero protest was a peaceful Coptic response to a church attack a few weeks earlier in Upper Egypt, when a mob had burned a Coptic church. Such egregious violations, while occurring with lesser frequency in 2021, remain a problem in Egypt, where the construction and renovation of Christian churches are closely regulated and can inflame local anti-Christian sentiment. But the anti-Coptic violence at the Maspero protests was not that of a village mob. It was carried out with impunity by Egyptian military personnel. In the 10 years since the 2011 Maspero assault, numerous international observers and media have noted the aggression of the Egyptian military in firing on the unarmed protesters and using heavily armed vehicles to run over and kill people. Eyewitness accounts have also documented the troubling role of Egyptian media outlets, which incited citizens nearby to aid the state forces in their literal crushing of the Coptic protesters. We at USCIRF commemorate October 9, 2011, not only to remember the people who lost their lives to violence that night in Maspero, but to highlight Egypt's need to relentlessly pursue an agenda that improves the lives of both Copts and Egyptians of every background and holds perpetrators accountable for religious freedom violations. To that end, USCIRF continues to call on the US government to urge Egypt to fulfill its stated promises to bring religious freedom and true equal citizenship rights to all its people, both in law and in practice. Thank you.
Alaa Abdel Fattah is an Egyptian blogger, software developer, and a political activist. As a leading political activist who came to prominence during Egypt's January 2011 popular uprising, Alaa participated in the Maspero rally along with Copts. His point was that Copts' rights are part of the national demands. He was friends with Mina Daniel, a leading Coptic activist who had also participated in the revolutionary protests in Tahrir Square. When the Egyptian army attacked the peaceful protesters in front of the Maspero building, Ala assisted in getting the wounded to the Coptic hospital and insisting that proper autopsies be performed on those who were killed. Obtaining an official record of this event was critical to document that massacre. Coptic Solidarity honors Ala Abdel Fattah's service and activism for human rights in Egypt and particularly for the Coptic rights. It would have been important that Ala record a video for this 10th year anniversary event, but alas, he is currently languishing in Tora prison, suffering an unjust imprisonment. He has been imprisoned for the most part of the last decade. His mother, Professor Layla Suwaif, recorded a message on Ala's behalf to commemorate the anniversary and remember Ala's dear friend Mina Daniel, who was martyred during this massacre. Dr. Suwaif has courageously continued her activism. Both her son Ala and daughter Sana Saif are currently imprisoned on false charges. Her images sitting for hours on the pavement in front of Tora prison, waiting for a mere letter from Ala, have shocked the conscience of people all over the world. We thank Dr. Suwaif for recording this message and for her tireless efforts to support a just Egypt for all.
10 years after Maspero, I ask myself, why did it feel so different from what came before it? There were clashes and deaths and killings in February and January, in February and March and May and July. Why was this so different? It was a massacre, a deliberate massacre. A deliberate massacre aimed at what the army conceived to be our weakest component, coupled with an attempt to change it from massacre by the army against civilians to sectarian violence. That day we lost 17 martyrs, now buried in the desert outside October City. We also lost Mina. Mina, who was our friend. Mina was Ala's friend. Ala wrote, "You have warned us for months, dear Mina, when you said it is crucial that Maspero joins forces with Tahrir Square. It is crucial that the demands of the Copts remain the demands of the people and vice versa." At the end of that day, we were all congregated at the morgue at the Coptic hospital. Again, I use Ala's words. We came looking for our friend from the square, the guy with the charming smile, Mina, who belonged to us and to whom we belong. Martyrdom chose Mina as he belongs to the church's flock as much as to the revolution. These were the words of his family members who insisted on involving his friends in every decision. We were his friends after all. Mina struggled from his afterlife, hoping we'd be accepted by the families of the martyrs, making us a group of comrades in the same struggle. We all bleed and weep the same, don't we?
Greetings to all of you who are gathering to commemorate the Maspero Massacre, Cairo, October 2011. This massacre was not an isolated incident. It must be seen against a background of structural discrimination, structural marginalization of Coptic Christians in Egypt. And I mean, there are also other structural reasons like religious fanaticism, incitement to collective hatred, but also the unwillingness on the side of the state to come to the rescue, to provide protection, efficient, effective protection to minorities, in particular Coptic minorities. The Egyptian state was, and I would say still is, a state characterized by authoritarianism, lack of accountability, the absence of reliable structures of rule of law, and a climate of impunity. So having all this in mind, one has to say the massacre, the Maspero Massacre, was not an isolated incident. When commemorating the massacre of October 2011, we mainly think of the families, the bereaved families who lost a son, a daughter, a mother, a father, a husband, a wife, a brother, or a sister. They will never forget. But it's important that they are not left alone in the memory of their loved ones. The massacre, which left more than 20 people dead and hundreds of people seriously injured, also had a traumatizing effect on the broader community, the Coptic community in Egypt. So I would assume there are still scars, tangible, visible in the community. And against the background of structural problems, discrimination, a climate of impunity, unwillingness of the state to come to the rescue. This also holds an obligation for all of us. We should not forget. We owe this to the victims, the families, the community, and we should feel obliged to do the utmost to eradicate the sources of hatred, the sources of fanaticism, through education, dialogue, media work, and other means. But we also have to contribute to building or rebuilding reliable structures of accountability, transparency, and to overcome the culture of impunity. And here human rights have to offer a lot, because human rights contribute to the procedures and institutions of the rule of law. And that in particular includes freedom of religion or belief. May God bless all of you. Thank you very much.
كشاهد عيان على مذبحة ماسبيرو يوم 9 أكتوبر 2011. عايز أبدأ من أول. حددنا الميعاد 9 أكتوبر 2011 لمسيرة سلمية تبدأ من دوران شبرا وتنتهي في ساحة ماسبيرو، مجرد مسيرة بدون أي اعتصام. المسيرة الكل يعلم بها، ما حدش اتكلم معانا عشان نأجلها، ما حدش اتكلم معانا عشان نغير مسارها، ما حدش اتكلم معانا عشان نتراجع عنها بأي شكل من الأشكال. كانت المسيرة اعتراضا على هدم كنيسة الماريناب، ودي كانت المسيرة الثالثة لينا في ساحة ماسبيرو. كل مرة كان بسبب هدم كنيسة أو حرق كنيسة. المرة الأولى كانت بسبب كنيسة أطفيح، المرة الثانية كان في الجيزة، المرة الثانية كانت بسبب كنيسة العذراء مبابة في الوراق في مبابة، والمرة الثالثة كانت بسبب كنيسة الماريناب في أسوان. تعاطف معنا عدد كبير جدا من شباب الثورة، أغلبهم داخل السجون الآن للأسف. أغلب هؤلاء الشباب ثورة 25 يناير تعاطفوا معنا. بمجرد دخولنا لساحة ماسبيرو تحركت المدرعات بشكل عشوائي بين المتظاهرين لغاية الأمر اللي أدى إلى دهس عدد كبير من المتظاهرين. التقارير الطبية بتاعت 14 شهيد من شهداء مذبحة ماسبيرو بتؤكد إن هم تم دهسهم بالمدرعات. فتحوا النيران على الشباب كمان، مش بس اكتفوا بدهس الشباب بشكل عشوائي، فتحوا النيران. والتقارير الطبية بتاعت 12 شهيد بتؤكد ان هم استشهدوا بالرصاص الحي اللي تم اطلاقه على الشباب. المذبحة استغرقت ربع ساعة فقط. المذبحة بكل تفاصيلها استغرقت تقريبا من 6 ل 6 و15 دقيقة ل 6 و13 دقيقة، مش أكتر من كده. كانت ساحة ماسبيرو اتملت بدماء الشهداء، وكان عدد كبير جدا من ضمنهم أنا كنت موجود مع عدد من المتظاهرين، شباب وعائلات وأطفال. كنا من كل الأعمار. الناس كانت خارجة كأسر، مش مجرد شباب. ده بيؤكد ان احنا كنا خارجين في مسيرة سلمية، وإلا ما كناش خدنا معانا كل العائلات اللي كانت موجودة وكل الأطفال. أنا شخصيا شاركت في نقل عدد كبير جدا من الأطفال من المنطقة في ساحة ماسبيرو، المرسى النهر اللي كان موجود في ساحة ماسبيرو. بعدها بدأ التلفزيون في حشد المتطرفين للخروج للاعتداء على بقية الشباب، وتم اعتداء على عدد كبير جدا من الشباب اللي كانوا كمان مروحين بعد الوقفة، بعد المسيرة السلمية دي، اللي خرجوا من الدهس واللي نجوا من الدهس ومن الرصاص. الحقيقة تم الاعتداء عليهم من عدد كبير من المتطرفين اللي ساهم في خروجهم التلفزيون المصري في الوقت ده. تقريبا صدر قرار بحظر التجول في حوالي الساعة 10 مساء، بمنع الناس من التجول لغاية الساعة 6 صباحا. في خلال الفترة دي كانت مرتبة برضو عشان يتم غسل الشوارع من كل الآثار، من كل الدماء، بحيث الناس اللي جات الصبح شعرت وكأن شيئا لم يكن في المنطقة. زالوا آثار الجريمة بتاعتهم. اللي ارتكب الجريمة بالتأكيد هم قيادات عسكرية كبيرة تم التستر عليها في الوقت ده، لأنه لا يستطيع أحد أنه يحرك المدرعات إلا قيادة عسكرية رفيعة المستوى، هي اللي ممكن في إيديها تؤمر بتحريك المدرعات أو إيقافها. ما حدث يتحمل مسؤوليته القيادات العسكرية. والحقيقة أنا خضعت خلال وجودي في مصر لكل أنواع. أنا تواجدت في مصر من بعد المذبحة لمدة شهور أو 7 شهور. من بعد مذبحة في أكتوبر مشيت من مصر في أبريل. خضعت لكل أنواع المحاكمات العسكرية والمدنية، والقاضي المدني كمان تنحى عن القضية أكتر من مرة علشان خاطر استشعاره الحرج، لأنه عارف أن من ارتكب هذه المذبحة هم القيادات العسكرية. القضية لن تسقط بالتقادم مهما طال الزمن، لأن المسؤولية اللي تقع على القيادات العسكرية تبدأ بالمشير طنطاوي، مرورا برئيس الأركان سامي عنان، بعد كده حمدي بدين، وقيادات عسكرية خرجت من السلطة، وقيادات عسكرية ما زالت موجودة الآن في مناصبها. إنما هذه النوعية من نوعيات القضايا لن تسقط بالتقادم، ولا بد من محاسبة القيادات العسكرية اللي شاركت سواء بالأوامر أو بالتخطيط أو بالتنفيذ، وأيضا القيادات الإعلامية اللي شاركت بتضليل الرأي العام، وما زال التضليل مستمر، وما زالت القضية بلا عدالة حتى الآن. أملنا في ربنا إن هذه النوعية من نوعيات القضايا لن تسقط بالتقادم. أكيد هيجي يوم ويتحاسب كل هؤلاء على ما اقترفوه بحق دماء الشهداء مذبحة ماسبيرو. بشارك الأسر في تذكار 10 سنوات على استشهاد الشهداء، وكمان يعني كلنا أمل في ربنا أن الله سيتدخل إن آجلا أو عاجلا، وستتحقق العدالة بمحاسبة كل هؤلاء.
They came together seeking warmth on this cold autumn night, traveling down a very long road with no clear path in sight. They knew justice was far from reach, but surrender was simply not a choice. They had been kicked out of their homes and hoped someone would hear their voice. Their church was destroyed before their very eyes, and their governor applauded the act. So when they said that this was not fair, they were thrown out, no questions asked. For months, they hoped someone would help them, but all their pleas had gone in vain. At the end, they came up with a plan. They thought to start an Occupy campaign. In Maspero, downtown Cairo, where the state media building stood, to present their grievances, to share their story, and all the injustices they withstood. But all their cries fell on deaf ears, and everyone ignored their plight, as if to deliberately humiliate them, to assert that Christians have no rights. As the nation watched, many hearts were grieving, many souls were bleeding, and under the veil of silence, anger was brewing. And on October 9th, in a very unusual sight, an avalanche of people hit the streets declaring, "We deserve equal rights. No more humiliation, no more contempt. United we will stand. Copts are full Egyptian citizens and the indigenous people of this land." Shoulder to shoulder they marched, thousands of men and women, carrying their grievances along with their faith, pleading to the God of heaven. Their destination was Maspero, where for weeks the victims held their occupy, and where the state media building stood with its anchors spewing their lies. They walked down the long dark road, dreaming of a better tomorrow, not knowing that this day would forever be remembered with grief and sorrow. As they went on their peaceful march, with no protection on their back, they didn't realize that they were an easy prey and a perfect target for attack. From a nearby bridge, gunshots were heard as armored tanks came out of nowhere, closing down on the peaceful crowd and attacking those whose arms were bare. Puddles of blood covered the ground as the tanks crushed their bones and dreams. A scene that melted the hearts of men, for all that could be heard was screams. The River Nile stood a silent witness and a burial place for some of those heroes, as its ruby-red waters preserved the story of the massacre that took place in Maspero.
Hello, my name is Muhammad Gohar. I used to own and run a business company called the Video Cairo Sad, located in 1129 Coronation Neal, Maspero. I like to give my testimony of what happened on October 9th, 2011. In the morning of that day, I noticed unusual people standing in the building next door to us and on the roof of Ramses Hilton Hotel, which is 2 buildings away from us. On the other side, building of Egypt TV is located there. I looked at the people, since I can easily have access to them and ask them what they are doing. People were dressed up in civilian clothes. This was early in the morning before anything happened. And I asked them why they are standing in the roof, and they reply back, they say, "We're coming here to fix the illustration boards which was on the top of the building." In the same time, we got news as a news agency that there is a peaceful demonstration, which we used to see a lot of demonstrations coming from different directions of Cairo and standing to protest in front of Egypt TV and in front of our premises, hoping that their voice can be heard and transmitted to Egypt TV and to all the foreign TV station which we work for. The demonstration was said that the Egyptian Christian was protecting against demolishing a church in Upper Egypt, which was built with inappropriate license. About in the evening, as soon as the demonstration arrived, around 6:30 in the evening, what happened was we found live shoot happened from people standing on 6th of October, which nobody can identify they can't identify where they come from, but they were carrying pistols and guns. And also the same people I asked on the roof of the Ramses building, they start to shoot at demonstrations. But what the most surprising thing, that the demonstration was attacked by security forces and the army, which was 3 of its tanks standing in front of Egypt TV and 2 military vehicles also protecting the army was standing there. Armed personnel carriers, I saw them crashing demonstrators and hitting them to death. And a whole mass happened after this, and clashes happened between the demonstrations and army soldiers. Police was firing tear gas. Egypt TV reported the deaths of 3 soldiers and requested all noble Egyptians to protect the military against the violence of the Copts, of the Christians. There was clashes, I see, but I never see any military dead people. At this time, because the demonstration was locked between 2 sides, I asked to open my building main gain door for the demonstration that they can run away from the attack which happened to them. While Egypt TV and 6th of October closed down the building. So the relatives or the other demonstration start to remove the injured people and the people who were hit by armored vehicles and the people who were shot into the entrance of my house. I saw about 25 dead bodies lying up in the entrance of my house and many other injured. The roads were blocked, so there was no ambulance coming, there was no medical help or medical assistance. Demonstrators who were still not hurt was helping the others who were hurt. And many of our staff, Video Cairo, were also came down to help. Some of them took some bodies and some of them took injured people and moved them to hospitals. We go back to Egypt TV, the announcement happened and it was outrageous. So we on 25 TV, which was transmitted from my building, came back with a counter announcement. You can see it, you can get it up from the internet, asking all parties to discipline, control, and put a call for the unity of both Christians and Muslims, Egyptians, to counterpart the Egypt TV announcement. After this, because demonstrations were trying to run from our door open and the back door open to the other side of the street, which is called Sahel al-Ghilal. Demonstrators were followed to Sahel al-Ghilal as they ran, also attacked by army people and police. Some of the people stuck, they couldn't get. The main door can get people, and the entrance of the building has many injured and dead. So some people couldn't get out from the back door. So they climbed to the stairs and came to my office, followed by armed group with machine guns. Quickly, I hide the group, which came to our 12th floor office in a hidden bathroom in the back. And when the army arrived, they asked where was the Copts demonstrations. And by the way, they are 16 persons. 2 of them were Muslims. They were not only Christians. But there was 2 priests in this hide. And the army asked everyone in the office, including me, where is the Copts? And nobody refused to tell them. So they start to do a search in the office. They break all the doors, except one door they didn't open, which where the Christians are hidden. And then there was one army man who was going absolutely crazy and terrorizing everybody, scaring everybody, loading his gun every 5 minutes and pointed to our heads. And then he asked everyone to go down on the floor and put their hands on their heads, like a war prisoner scene. And he started to check the ID of the people who are working for Video Cairo. The third one lying on the floor on the line, he found his ID was Christian. He started to hit him. He break his head and he break his arm. And this was one of the most unbelievable racist scene I would never imagine that would happen in Egypt. There was 3 waves of attacks, not only this one. They go, after they didn't found, they go and come back with more police, and then they went and come back with other people like 2 o'clock in the morning. This happened continuously for 18 hours. 2 o'clock in the morning, I found a group dressed up in civilian place, and they came to us. They were trying to get the tapes of the vehicles hitting the demonstrators, and they were cleaning up the scene. They asked the remove of the body, and they also let ambulance come and remove the blood and the mass scene of the entrance of my building and the coronation kneel in the street.
It is an honor to be with you today to mark this sober anniversary. 10 years have passed since the shameful Maspero Massacre. Those of us who mark this tragic anniversary remember well what occurred on that infamous day in October 2011, when Coptic Christians came together in Egypt to march and protest. They were angry. They had cause to be. They were protesting the destruction of one of their places of worship, a church that represented a home and a sanctuary for this minority religious community, which has endured great persecution throughout its history. Yet despite their righteous anger, they were peaceful. They were exercising that basic, inalienable right to express themselves, that fundamental freedom to speak out against injustice, and to stand up for their freedom to worship according to the dictates of their conscience. As we all know, their peaceful protest evolved into a violent military attack, resulting in hundreds of injuries. For 27 of the brave souls who had joined the protest, the march became a martyrdom. The Maspero Massacre is a truly appalling example of persecution and violence on the basis of religious belief. The story of this massacre feels as though it should belong to a far-off, long-ago place in time, not the past decade, here in the enlightened 21st century. Tragically, this kind of needless, excessive, and unthinkable violence directed at religious minorities is neither uncommon nor is it universally condemned in our day and age. There are far too many places throughout the world where hate and bigotry, particularly directed at religious minorities, has taken hold and often been allowed to flourish. Even where religious persecution is not encouraged explicitly, it is sometimes enabled by people in positions of power who refuse to deliver justice for the victims or to hold accountable those responsible for allowing the violence to happen. This is certainly the case with the Maspero Massacre. And today I join with many others in calling for greater transparency and accountability around the events of the massacre. Most importantly, I call for justice for the victims of the massacre and their families. My father, the late Congressman Tom Lantos, was a lifelong student of history and would often quote the maxim, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." It is a privilege to be with you today to remember the Maspero Massacre. We must never forget what happened on this day. But remembering alone will not ensure that history does not repeat itself. To guarantee that our future does not hold more tragic massacres, more needless martyrdoms of the Coptic Christians, and people from many other faith traditions, we must commit ourselves to standing up for religious freedom and standing against religious persecution, wherever in the world it occurs and whomever it targets. We must, in one sense, be much like Alexander Dumas' famed musketeers, one for all and all for one. When we take on the struggles of our fellow men and women as our own, even though we may adhere to very different faiths, we will collectively bring the world closer to a reality in which everyone, everywhere, can experience freedom of religion, conscience, and belief. As we honor the memory of those lost in the Maspero Massacre, those still mourning their loss, and those forever altered by this tragedy, may we also commit ourselves to doing whatever is within our power to ensure that such a massacre never happens again to any religious minority anywhere. Thank you.
I'm Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. I'm also former chairman of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Today I join the Coptic community and men and women of goodwill all over the world in remembering the martyrs, the 27 martyrs murdered by government troops while exercising their basic human rights to speak, to protest, to make their voices heard, to ask for the redress of injustices. We must not forget these martyrs. None of us may forget these martyrs. We must also remember the more than 300 innocent people who were injured, some of them very severely injured, in the same massacre. I want all of our Coptic Egyptian brothers and sisters to know that I stand with them. I stand with them today, I stand with them every day. And I stand with thousands upon thousands and indeed millions of people throughout the world in remembering the martyrs and in standing up for justice for all Coptic Christians and for all mankind.
My name is Mina Sabit. I'm a founding member of Maspero Youth Union and the survivor of Maspero Massacre, a peaceful demonstration that was turned into a bloodbath by the military soldiers. 10 years ago, October 9, 2011, I joined thousands of men, women, and children in a peaceful march from Shopra district to the Maspero building to protest discrimination and sectarian violence against Christians in Egypt. I walked these streets many times before and after that day, yet it was never the same. I didn't know that in few hours I would see so much death, so much destruction, and so much hate. I never imagined that an armored vehicle would run over innocent people holding wooden crosses and singing Kyrie song. I've never imagined that military soldiers would roam the downtown streets and break into buildings, search IDs to arrest Christians. I've never imagined that after what happened, they will get away with it. 10 years have passed, and I still remember every detail of that day. I still remember what happened. For 10 years, the Egyptian authorities had been trying to bury the truth about that day. But little do they know, the truth about that day will never die. We will carry the truth in our hearts and minds, and we will tell the truth every day and every moment in our lives. We will tell the story of those who stood against persecution, discrimination, and sectarian violence and said this is enough. We will tell the truth about our army soldiers who killed innocent people because simply they carried wooden crosses and raised banners that said no to burning churches. Over a decade, we exhausted everything in our power to seek justice for the innocent soul that left us that day. But a decade has passed, and we're still seeking justice. Justice was never served. Justice was never served because those in power have built their thrones over foundations soaked in the blood and the suffering of the innocent. Today, we remember the Maspero Massacre, while our brother Rami Kamel is approaching 2 years in arbitrary pre-trial detention, just for speaking up against sectarian violence. Once again, Egyptian authorities are seeking to silence a Coptic voice. Once again, Egyptian authorities are punishing Christians for speaking up. Today, I invite you all to continue the call for justice for Maspero victims and call for the immediate and unconditional release of Coptic activist Rami Kamel. Today, I invite you to stand up to the Egyptian authorities and say, we remember. We will never forget. We know the truth. We will keep telling the truth, and we will continue calling for justice until it's served. We remember Maspero.
بالصبر بشعب وطني حر في 9 أكتوبر خرجوا ويواجهوا الغرب هدف ما يعرفوا فلانوا بحرية كان ظهرهم مكشوف في مسيرة سلمية رافضين يعيشوا ضيوف جوا البلد دي رافضين يعيشوا ضيوف جوا البلد دي
لكن في ماسبيرو الغدر مستنيهم غمرتهم الطلقات والموت حصد فيهم
لكن في ماسبيرو الغدر مستنيهم غمرتهم الطلقات والموت حصد فيهم بسلاح ودبابات على ايد حاميهم بسلاح ودبابات على ايد حاميهم الصبر مسيرة سلمية، رافضين يعيشوا ضيوف جوه البلد دي، رافضين يعيشوا ضيوف جوه البلد دي.
برا التاريخ فوتوا يا زمرة الظالمين، ده الحق في سكوته عالٍ تكونوا مين. برا التاريخ فوتوا يا زمرة الظالمين، ده الحق في سكوته عالٍ تكونوا مين.
انتوا اللي هتموتوا والشهداء وما عايشين، انتوا اللي هتموتوا والشهداء وما عايشين.
بعد ما فاض صبر بشعب ووطن، في 9 أكتوبر خرجوا يواجهوا الهوى، بهتاف ما يعرف خوف نادوا بحرية، من ظهرهم مكشوف في مسيرة سلمية، رافضين يعيشوا ضيوف جوه البلد دي، رافضين يعيشوا ضيوف جوه البلد دي.
ميزان عدالتكم مهما انكفى ومات، الأرض دي اتطهرت بدم من دنياك.
ميزان عدالتكم مهما انكفى أو مات، الأرض دي اتطهرت بدم من دنياك. وانت تقتلوا الآلافات فك الدم